Welcome to the Tintin podcast, where we explore the adventures of Tintin, one story at a time. Whether you're a long-time fan of the books or you just discovered the world of the boy reporter, this is the place for you. We'll be taking a deep dive into Hergé's iconic series, unpacking the stories, art, historical context, and everything else that makes Tintin a global phenomena. Each episode will explore one of Tintin's adventures in detail, with plenty of trivia scattered right through. I'm Varun, and today we're setting sail on a thrilling maritime mystery as Tintin stumbles upon a smuggling ring, crosses paths with some dangerous foes, and meets an unforgettable new ally in the crab with the golden claws. A slightly smaller cast today. Joining me is Loki.
Hi, Varun.
And we welcome Manisha, who's rediscovering Tintin after reading these stories countless times growing up.
Hello, everyone.
So Loki, World War II is very much in the present with the crab with the golden claws. Heavily impacted by the Nazi invasion of Belgium, this book was in fact a compromise, as Hergé had intended to put out Land of Black Gold as the next adventure. Hergé and his wife in fact had to flee to France for a while, and he even had to switch newspapers from Le Petit Vingtième to Le Soir. All of this turbulence, does it come across in the tale to you?
Yeah, so unfortunately I don't think that real-world context really drifts into that book. This really feels a lot like apolitical escapism, similar to the beginnings of Cigars of the Pharaoh, which are very kind of fantasy-based. I think it sort of contributes to the fairly boring or lackluster kind of opening scenes, where Snowy is the only real highlight for me. If you compare it to that kind of sense of dread that's in The Shooting Star, which is the next volume, or The Land of Black Gold, which he was originally writing at this time, both have this kind of build-up and tension in the first act that isn't here. One thing I found in researching, I didn't realize this until recently, is that there were thousands upon thousands of Belgians killed in the Nazi invasion. Like, I think in the grand scheme of World War II, it's not a lot, but when you think of the kind of small population of Belgium and so many people dying, it makes sense that he wanted to move away from that world. You know, both physically he fled to France, but also that kind of, in a storytelling sense, he doesn't want it to be a political story.
So pure fiction. Do you agree with that, Manisha?
Yep. No, I think I concur. I think the book really takes that step away from, real world politics. In particular, I think when I was researching this as well, that the publication that Hergé was publishing in Le Soir was overseen by the Nazi administration, and there was a lot of disdain for that. I think Hergé got several letters, etc., from the Belgians who were quite displeased. And it could be, why he takes that step back from overt political themes. Having those accurate descriptions that we see in Blue Lotus, for example, it really adopts that sense of neutrality, if you may.
Loki, you just touched on the subpar opening scenes of the book, and it's hard to disagree. Tintin is home for the first 10 or so pages of the story, and it's all rather ho-hum, isn't it?
I think it is, and I don't think it has the same kind of impact and immersion as The Broken Ear or even The Shooting Star that comes next. You've got kind of Snowy getting trapped in the can, sneaking bones, helping Tintin with his magnifying glass, and you get some kind of foolishness from the Thompsons, but it's a really kind of forgettable first act in comparison in particular to the books that surround it that also give you a bit of Tintin at home, but not necessarily in the same, with a lot more, I think, like depth and richness to it.
And Manisha, we can then heave a sigh of relief that much of the rest of the tale takes us outdoors, to Morocco to be specific in this story. And that got me thinking, we're never far away from the Arab world in the Tintin adventures, are we? Cigars, the Swan, Black Gold, Red Sea Sharks later, you name it.
Yeah, I think a couple of kind of points potentially to why we keep seeing Tintin go there. I think there's this sense of there's this European fascination with the exotic East, if you may. There's a lot of mystery in the region, lawlessness, which they've depicted with the Bedouins, etc., and the way they're portrayed across the books, and these very kind of adventure-filled landscapes like the desert and the harshness of the desert. I think there's also a lot of sort of geopolitical relevance from that time, just colonialism and how France, Britain, etc., controlled vast parts of Middle East and North Africa, and so they became an inherent part of trade routes, and so were very relevant at the time as well.
In my mind, Arabia is still just so fascinating, even now, from actually at the time for awful reasons, but we kind of look at it through somewhat rose-colored glasses, and it's now, similarly awful, but it's a place of tension. It's a place that feels mysterious and different, but in a way that we have had, particularly if we view it through the European lens, we've had, centuries of contact and conflict, but it's still a place that we don't fully understand and haven't been able to master. It's a testing place for him. It's an exotic and exciting place. I think that's the real driver of it. Whereas, I don't know, Hergé seemed quite critical of America. And once you've gone to America and said it's awful, there's not a lot more you can say about it.
Hasn't returned to North America since book 3, so there must be something to that. Anyhow, out here in the Sahara, we can see that Tintin is not alone. Tongue-in-cheek, pretty convenient of you to join us when Haddock enters the scene, Manisha.
See, I mean, Haddock's my favorite character, right? So I think I was also glad in an otherwise I feel lackluster plot to see Haddock. And I think he really introduces some sense of dimension in the series. It moves from maybe more straightforward adventure tales to more deeper character-driven storytelling. I think Haddock tries to kind of humanize Tintin, if you may. Tintin is often shown as this character who has, very one-directional, who's too perfect, composed, always making a very morally judicious decision, if you may. Haddock has flaws. He has, his alcoholism, his temper, etc. That really makes this adventure more relatable. And I think that's kind of powerful in the way the comics tend to evolve.
But would you have guessed, Loki, at least from his initial appearance in the story, that Haddock would be a mainstay for the rest of the series?
I don't think so. I don't think with his initial appearance, the extremity of his drunkenness, I don't think Hergé could have intended to maintain that beyond one book as a side character, similar to someone like Chang or Professor Sarcophagus, because he is such a liability in parts of those stories. And you see immediately in The Shooting Star, and then even more so in the Unicorn Twins, how much his character is silly and ridiculous and dangerous at times, but he's not physically threatening to Tintin in the same way. Like he appears in, when Tintin has that nightmare in the French fort, as very scary. So I think he initially intended him to be a one-off ridiculous character in the vein of Sarcophagus, and he ended up falling in love with him. I think, he said that he really enjoyed writing him because he was tired in some ways of writing that perfect Tintin character. So I think he, partway through the story, he somewhat pivots to make Haddock much more foolish but heroic, rather than a constant threat to Tintin.
A constant threat to Tintin, much like the spirits were a constant threat to himself. Manisha, is there such a thing as too much alcohol as far as the story goes?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to be honest, the whole concept of sort of alcohol, for me, showcases, I guess it lends a sense of comedic element to the book, but I think it also kind of is used as a basis for that slapstick comedy and showing Haddock's evolving character. So anytime he shows self-restraint, he is not drunk. And I think Hergé kind of uses that to some degree of effectiveness within this book, but I think progressively as the character evolves, it becomes more and more kind of effective. I think what's particularly interesting to me is how Tintin continues to be shown as this sort of teetotaler and being this near perfect, if you may, character across the series and this book.
Loki, you disagree?
No, I actually really enjoy it. I love the alcohol as like a symbol for the adult world and its corruption. The Thompsons are useless detectives and they're first seen drinking, and then they are tricked by Alan when they get drunk. Captain is not necessarily corrupt, but he's a victim of corruption or a tool of corruption because he's constantly drunk. Tintin abstains from drinking, and he's kind of seen as Manisha pointed out, as this kind of, righteous moral character. And he kind of continues to symbolize this kind of perfect youth that is innocent, and all these kind of positive, strong character traits that the other characters bounce against and kind of look foolish in juxtaposition to. So I really enjoy the use of alcohol as a symbol in this book.
Now, another duo are known to enjoy a drink or two, the Thompson twins. Loki, I know you mentioned before that you're not a fan of them being shoehorned into every adventure. Here, do you think they actually earn their place in the story, or do they feel tacked on again?
No, I think it completely makes sense that they're there at the beginning, particularly in those kind of early scenes with Tintin and him showing them showing him his evidence of the crab tin and him having that moment of realization, and then their foolishness in being tricked by Alan again. It kind of sets up that dynamic of Tintin being this perfect detective, perfect boy reporter, etc. And then they play a pivotal role at the end in kind of legitimizing, in some ways, the way that Tintin and Haddock close out the story. They support him. How did they get to Bagar? Doesn't really matter. Didn't think about it until my 100th reread this week when I went, oh, that plot point doesn't quite make sense. Yeah, I think this is a great balance of how they fit in the story, and not too much, not too little. A really high point for them, I thought.
Of course, they're no match for a real detective, Bunji Karaki. Fair to ask the question though, Manisha, what was a Japanese detective doing in the Mediterranean in the 1940s?
I found him to be quite redundant in terms of how the story progressed, and so yeah.
Well, to me, this didn't occur to me as a child reading it at all. I kind of loved the idea of kind of police working together on international operations and stuff, and maybe it was kind of loosely connected to something. It's only as an adult that I kind of realized, oh, that's actually quite odd. But I do think I was listening to the Blue Lotus episode, and Derek pointed out that there was a quite negative reaction to the portrayal of Japanese in that. So I think it may have been a deliberate choice to humanize someone that he kind of really significantly racially stereotyped earlier.
A rather unique foe this book throws into the equation is heat and dehydration. Pretty obvious, I suppose, when you're stranded in a desert, but we didn't see much of that in the story so far. Adds an interesting dimension to things, doesn't it, Loki?
Yeah, I love it. I think it adds to his credentials as an adventurer. I think the relationship between Tintin and Haddock is forged in this kind of near-death experience, and we see that both Tintin and Haddock are quite protective of each other once they arrive in Bagar. But I also think it goes back to those original origins of Tintin, where Hergé based him on his brother, who was a Boy Scout, who is the cliche about them is that they're prepared for anything, and Tintin is as prepared as possible after this flight where he miraculously saves them to face the most challenging environment of all, and does a relatively good job.
If only the rest of the story were more of a page-turner. We talked earlier about the companion Arab adventures, and honestly, I found each of them far more gripping than this one. How about you?
Look, the reality is Land of Black Gold and Red Sea Sharks, to me, are particular high points of the series. And this is just not as good. But I think one thing that's really overlooked is this is that kind of classic beginning of the middle period of Tintin where there's still a lot of vibrancy to the artwork. And I find like the artwork in particular, particularly those desert scenes that we were talking about and the dream sequences, I think they're some of the best in the series, where there's that real kind of spontaneity to the movement, and it feels very alive, which makes it all the more threatening as well.
And also, I think, relevant concerns of that time, um, drug trafficking, organized crime, etc. I'm not sure this book is perhaps the best kind of depictor of all of those themes from a reality perspective, but nevertheless, it definitely acts as those windows into some of the overarching themes that were relevant for that century.
Like Loki said, one thing that hasn't suffered is the quality of the art, which has been on an upward trend since arguably Tintin in America, has it, Manisha?
Yeah, no, I think for me, from an artwork perspective, it goes back to kind of character expressions for me, and I think Haddock being the kind of personality that he is and the character that he is, I really enjoyed this kind of exaggerated expressions that were introduced through the artwork. It really gives a lot more dimension to kind of character artistry within the book as well. So I think for me, artwork which hit me was less about the landscape of the surroundings. Of course, I love the kind of full page frames and the way those were depicted, but for me it was character artistry.
About those 4 full-page panels, here's the trivia. Because of changes in how the adventure had been serialized in Le Soir, the book ended up being only 58 pages long, and so those 4 frames had to be added to meet Casterman's requirement of 62 pages. Do you like those frames, Loki?
I love them. I think he doesn't quite do full pages, but he does half pages in the Blue Lotus and in a few other places. And I think it's a real shame that these kind of large-scale pages weren't a more consistent feature. I think, like, you look at how vivid some of the covers are. Can you imagine? I was thinking particularly of the Picaros, where their escape down that pyramid is one tiny frame in the corner. And imagine that as a full page spread where the artist, Hergé or whoever the other artists working on, like Bob Moore, could really spread out and show the kind of depth and detail. I wish there was more of it throughout the series. The action of that swooping seaplane adds that an incredible sense of danger, and then the real kind of impending doom and desperation in that image of Haddock and Tintin barely supporting one another, and the joy of Snowy, trotting along with his bone, completely unaware. I think those 2 in particular are highlights. Once they get to Bagara, I think, these could have easily been smaller panels, and they don't really build the narrative up. But those first 2, I think, are really amazing.
There's a question each for both of you. Loki, this book has Tintin's most famous meme going around. Did you spot it?
I certainly did. Some funny backstory. Hopefully this person doesn't listen to the podcast, but I once shared this in some slides at work, and now I feel like the same person every week sends that to our work Teams group every Wednesday. And every Wednesday I think, you stole that from me. I love it. I think it's very funny. It's very relatable, and a great kind of early piece of Captain artwork where, again, like Manisha said, like, his expressive face sells so much.
And Manisha, one of our listeners, wants to know what makes this book an important part of the Tintin series besides the introduction of the Captain.
It is a very important book in the way Tintin is kind of perceived, more broadly. I think it was kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the first ones for, stop motion film. And so it really kind of adapted. It's also the first book that I think was introduced to the US. So it's up there in reality in terms of how it introduced Tintin to the rest of the world, but not so much for me.
And it's time for a rating.
I'm gonna go with 4.5 on this one. I don't know if you could do half a crystal ball, but nevertheless, I think great use of characters, but compromised by maybe a lackluster story.
And that's a wrap on our journey through the Crab with the Golden Claws. This adventure not only introduced us to the thrilling world of high-sea smuggling, but also marked the unforgettable debut of Captain Haddock, a character who will become central to Tintin's future escapades. Next up, we're heading into uncharted territory with The Shooting Star, a cosmic mystery filled with doomsday predictions, high-stakes exploration, and an eerie race against time. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe as we continue our journey with the Tintin podcast.